Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas E. Anderson II. I would like to welcome you to Can Organizations Learn to See? Reimagining Critical Infrastructure Sectors Using Foresight and Strategic Vision-Based Leadership. If you've ever flown in the friendly skies and they suddenly turned unfriendly, this scene probably looks very familiar. Airplane trips and the turbulence can have a jarring effect for passengers. And inside the airplane can become a very chaotic environment. VUCA is an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And these factors are a major cause of turbulence in the business environment. When challenges are unexpected and unstable, they create volatile situations. When the general cause and effect are known, but information is in short supply, it can lead to uncertainty. When there are many interconnected parts and variables, a large amount of information is available, but it's hard to process. It can lead to a complex situation. And then when the situation is unprecedented and the cause effect relationships are obscure, it makes it difficult to know what information is missing. And so the situation is deemed ambiguous. And so Bennett and Lemoyne wrote an article, and what they proposed was agility can replace volatility, that you can address uncertainty with information. Restructuring the organization's design can help to combat complexity, and then experimentation helps to deal with ambiguity. Vision emerges on the boundary between the internal and external environment as a way to cope with the VUCA factors. The education sector is in desperate need of visioning, essentially reimagining its future in light of increased turbulence. And this presentation will focus on college and career readiness in education. Before we unpack a few of the issues and trends, I would like to provide some context and a brief overview of the education space. According to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, there are 16 critical infrastructure sectors whose assets, systems, and networks, whether they're physical or virtual, are considered to be so vital to the United States that if they become incapacitated or destroyed, it would have a debilitating effect on security, national economy security, national public health or safety, or any combination thereof. And education is a subsector of one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, the government facility sector. And so education has three components: K through 12, higher education, and business and trade schools. The many issues within education share common themes. I have listed themes here, and they are funding and accountability, education equity, technology, meeting job skills demand, internal issues, and well-being concerns. On the left side of the chart, you will see that K through 12 issues are a little bit different than those in higher education, which are on the right side of the chart. And so the K through 12 issues, some of them are government funding, disciplinary policies, virtual learning, college and career readiness, and then moving on to higher education, student loan forgiveness, completion rates, again, virtual learning is repeating here, and then career preparation are a few of the issues in higher education. Current trends include conversations around education equity. Also, learning by doing is gaining in popularity. There's a no more grades movement bubbling on the surface. Micro credentials are being awarded, which are badges in essence, for completing shorter trainings. There's also a flipped learning model where self-directed learning is replacing that lecture and homework model. And then social and emotional skills are also being taught. Now that you have an overview of a few of the issues and trends in education, I would like to talk more about the Foresight tool of visioning, but in particular shared visioning. And so our topic is using shared visioning to future-proof college and career readiness in the education subsector. In the remainder of this presentation, I will go over essential things to know about shared visioning, including its history, benefits, application, and then we'll wrap up with some next steps. Shared visioning is very similar to whole group discovery and design thinking, but it takes those skills and it applies it to co-creating a shared vision for the future. It's quite different from strategy development, which is centered around how to win or how to achieve, different from mission statements and purpose statements that respectively deal with what a company will do and why they exist. Shared visioning helps to bridge the gap between foresight, strategy development, and organization change. And in essence, it helps an organization learn how to see as a unit and not just as one leader or as individuals. They see collectively. Vision is forward-looking and aspirational. It is not limited by current or past realities, but it's not disconnected from them either. The collective approach to visioning is a change for many companies and their leaders. When you have a lot of different organizations, shared visioning becomes critical because there is no clear visionary leader. You have a collection of stakeholders with varying interests to look out for, and some interests they hold in common, but others are quite unique. And so this tool is important for two primary reasons. One, to generate the buy-in and commitment necessary for the vision to be widely adopted by a critical mass of stakeholders. And two, to move on to the phase of vision development where stakeholders use the shared vision, to guide what they do and the decisions they make on a daily basis. Visioning and collaboration are age-old practices. Vision is also associated with change, and it usually precedes change. In the mid-20th century, the advent of training groups, or T groups, led to the invention of methods that supported a whole system approach to change and involved stakeholders in creating their own futures. These practices are now in use, and they include appreciative inquiry, whole system collaborative change, and many others, where you get stakeholders in a room and they invent the future. In 1994, something really special happened uh, in regards to shared visioning. And it happened when Peter Senge and Brian Smith wrote about the 5 starting points for shared visioning, which include telling, selling, testing, consulting, and then what we're talking about today, co-creating. Vision is most closely associated with charismatic transformational leadership and visionary leadership, of course. But it also appears in many disciplines, including, of course, strategic foresight, also strategic leadership, servant leadership, product development, organization change, and transformation, just to name a few. And we're going to focus on visioning as a phase of strategic foresight today. There are potential risks of not using shared visioning. One is what I call the adoption pit, where leaders search for a vision, they conceive of a vision, they work with stakeholders to go through the process, and it's usually not as many stakeholders as would be desired. But then they hit a brick wall where they lack buy-in, commitment, and that ultimately impacts implementation. Another potential risk is having unsurfaced, unquestioned assumptions that wreak havoc when you get to strategy, development, and execution, and also blind spots that are due to an insufficient amount of collective intelligence from the general body of the organization, or in the case of a sector, different people, different industry leaders, and people on ground level. Now, what we might miss without this tool is building a strategy, and this would probably be the downside of not using it, building a strategy that's based on wrong or unexpressed assumptions or missing stakeholder information. There are opportunities, potential opportunities for using the tool, and they include moving from visioning as this event where folks come together to create a vision statement to using visioning as a foresight activity. And then it can bridge the gap between unbridled foresight and the activities associated with strategy development and implementation. Hines and Bishop provide three major steps for developing a strategic vision using a collaborative approach. First, they suggest to identify implications by framing important questions and then unpacking second and third order implications using the futures wheel and then considering unintended consequences of any changes that are planned. Second, they say to challenge assumptions by uncovering them and clarifying them, questioning everything, and then cross-checking to validate any assumptions that are lingering. The third step is to think visionary by developing a strategic vision and stretch goals, and then asking those what if questions, those scenario-based questions, and then iterating the vision using the emerging future. So let's move on to a quick history of college and career readiness. In 1779, Thomas Jefferson casted the vision for education within two classes of citizens, the laboring and the learned. In 1821, the first public high school opened in Boston as a vocational school to educate working class boys in business mechanics and engineering. And then about almost 100 years later, the Smith-Hughes Vocational Education Act of 1917 allocated federal funds to educate people that were beginning a career on the farm. Between 1918 and 1945, the Commission on the Reorganization of Secondary Education issued a document which laid the groundwork for present-day high schools. Moving on mid-century to 1957, the shock that was associated with the Russian satellite Sputnik infused a sense of urgency around policies to create new curriculum, better facilities, and curriculum changes. And this pushed more students toward college preparation. In the late 1960s and the 1970s, the civil rights movement went into full swing and it ensured equal access to public education. And in 1972, the Title IX of the Education Amendments prohibited discrimination against women. In 1983, curriculum reform instituted more rigorous and measurable standards due to a wake-up call about the position of the United States education system as compared to other countries. In 1989, there was a bipartisan education summit hosted by President George H.W. Bush, and it was attended by 49 of the nation's governors, including his future presidential opponent, at the time, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton. In the 2000s, the No Child Left Behind Act was instituted, and the development of the Common Core began in 2007. And then in 2010, there's been a push toward career readiness and realization of how the past decades' efforts around college and career readiness had fallen short. So moving on to present day, there are learning gaps that have increased due to the COVID-19 lockdowns and months of virtual learning, both in the K through 12 arena and the higher education arena. It's more prevalent in K through 12, but the learning gaps will likely widen the skills gaps. There's a lot that could be said about the future. I've chosen two to describe the desired future state, and that includes an optimized college and career pathway or optimized pathways, and then a situation where students possess the required skills for their chosen careers. Shared visioning applies across sectors, communities, organizations, departments, and teams using a multi-stakeholder approach. And so let's move on to discuss benefits and the application of this tool within education. Shared visioning carries opportunities as well as risks. Some of the opportunities that can emerge are being able to generate diverse perspectives, building shared understanding, getting everyone on the same page, and moving in a common direction, and then reimagining student pathways from usually middle school through their future jobs and careers. Some risks include, well, let me just take a step back. With the generation of diverse perspectives comes more complexity, and so that has to be managed. Also, the team may or may not produce a vision statement, but it's good to think in terms of coming up with a good enough vision, a vision that's good enough to move on. And there may be a situation where, in questioning the assumptions, certain interest groups are unable to resolve their conflicts in that moment or in that session. And then stakeholder groups can feel threatened by challenging conventional wisdom and questioning those assumptions that we hold under the surface. Regardless of the risks, shared visioning does have strategic implications that include the ability to build a shared understanding, and through shared understanding, a shared meaning is crystallized between stakeholders. Also, there's the opportunity to reevaluate education-related values that emerged during that timeline that I went over a few minutes ago. And then another implication is to strengthen that middle school to job market pathway, or that set of pathways that lead students to their chosen careers, to also increase education and marketplace partnerships. And there are quite a few nonprofit and for-profit companies that are doing that, including Pencils Inc., Breakthrough, and several others. And then shared visioning can be a springboard for conflict resolution as well. So let's wrap up with a short conclusion, and that'll be followed by next steps. From the primary schooler who is thinking about what they want to be when they grow up, to the high schooler who's getting introduced to classes that they're interested in and interested in pursuing later on in life in their jobs and their careers, to the college student who is at the end of their program, crossing over into the workforce, all the way to the person who's been in the workforce for a few decades and needs to upskill. All of these situations reflect one thing, that we are all stakeholders in college and career readiness. And so reimagining college and career readiness requires courage, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge convention. And so here are a couple of next steps. One would be to reflect on the backstory of college and career readiness, not only in the United States, but also in your life. And that would lead to number two, questioning any assumptions that you hold. Some assumptions that we hold are not really ours, they were imparted to us. And to unpack any values related to education. Third would be to consider the impact of any skills gaps that you notice on your team, or maybe any skills gaps that you notice, in your own performance. And the fourth would be to consider unconventional ways to reduce the gaps. That's one of the biggest issues right now in the workforce and in preparing workers for the future workforce. Well, I hope you learned a lot today, and here's my contact information. Just in case you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me at thomas@tayano.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and feel free to visit my website. The address is here for you. Thank you for attending.